Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ask Kati Anything. I'm your host, licensed marriage and family therapist, Kati Morton. How are you? Just checking in. I've been having kind of an overwhelming couple of weeks, just want to be completely honest, between writing the book and doing the podcasts and preparing videos and live streams and Patreon stuff. It's been a lot, so I just want to check in with you, see how you're doing. I plan on journaling after this, I know, shocker, and also taking a bath this evening. So maybe consider some ways that you can set aside time for yourself. I was just talking with a member of our community about how we often think that, in order to give ourselves time to process or time for self-care, we think it needs to take a lot of time or potentially cost money, and it really doesn't. Like journaling doesn't cost me anything. I guess if you don't have paper or pen to write on, it can cost you a little bit to get that going. But you can also, just sit and breathe for a bit or do some stretches or whatever your body is asking for, whatever your brain needs. I know that I personally need to journal a little bit more because I've fallen off because I've been working so much, and that's on me, right? I need to prioritize myself. And so this is just a reminder for me and maybe a reminder for those of you who need to hear it, that we need to put ourselves first because, we can't pour from an empty cup. And if we don't take care of ourselves, then we won't be able to keep doing what we do. Okay? Without further ado, let's talk about today's episode. Now, I'm going to answer a question about whether or not we can get a past therapist to see us again. I'm going to talk about if we can move on in life without having a true sense of self, and how often we have to be purging in order to be diagnosed with an eating disorder. Then I'm also going to offer some ways that we can work up the courage to share something difficult with our therapist. What to do if we find ourselves being the abusive ones in our relationships. And finally, I'm going to explain the symptoms that we can have due to having a mom that is a narcissist. And if you're wanting to get more questions answered or you want to participate in a bigger way within our community, you can join over on my YouTube memberships page. Just go, I think it's just my channel page, hit join. I have 4 live streams a month at the top tier if you're at the Psyched Up 60. But if that's not in your budget, you can do Psyched Up 30 and get 2 30-minute live streams each and every month. Then we also have a bunch of ways to participate and engage over on Patreon. I have a Discord server. We have 1 to 2 live streams a month over there. Those are a little bit longer. You can go to patreon.com/Kati Morton. Okay. Let's get into question number 1. This question says, "Hi, Kati. I'm wondering if my therapist will take me back. I'm 21 and have suffered all my life with obsessions with authority figures, usually teachers or bosses. It's gotten very intense in the past, and usually I think about them 24/7. Though I'm not a stalker or creepy or dangerous, my suspicion is that my complicated relationship with my mom, whom I adore, but who has unfortunately admitted to not really ever bonding with me, might be the problem." I think that's possible too. A year ago, I went to a therapist to discuss this, and after the second session, I told her honestly that I wasn't ready and needed some time. We agreed that I'd come back when I wanted. Unfortunately, after that second session, I became totally obsessed with her, and it lasted for a year now. I'm always talking to her inside my head and writing poetry about her, writing and drawing fantasies of her comforting or talking to me, using AI to write dialogue with her, etc. I've even thought about her while making out with guys or at the club. It's insane. I wanted to go back in a couple of months because I want to work on this. This is getting out of hand, and I'm too old to be this weak. However, I'm not really sure she'll take me back because of how intense and prolonged this obsession was without ever seeing or communicating with her. I wouldn't take it personally or make a fuss or anything, but I'd love to be prepared and maybe just skip over her to a new therapist right away. Though I'm worried the same thing might happen. Me too. Not even really sure any therapist would be enthusiastic to take on such an extreme obsessive LOL. I really chose the worst kind of issue. Thoughts? Thanks. I love this question. Now, first of all, I want to address talking about a therapist taking us back in a different context for any of you who are looking for that advice. Now, if we had a therapist who maybe referred us out to a higher level of care, or who said that we were out of their scope of practice, or maybe we ended the sessions ourselves, the only reason a therapist would not take you back is if they felt like it was out of their scope of practice, meaning, like, let's say you need treatment for autism spectrum disorder. I don't specialize in that, but I referred you out to someone who does. I wouldn't take you back because, again, it's not my specialty or not what I feel I'm able to offer care-wise, okay? That would be one reason. The second being that you need a higher level of care. Like if I referred you out for inpatient, you're like, I really want to keep seeing you week after week. I'm like, you really need a more intensive treatment. I wouldn't take you back then either. Doesn't mean that I wouldn't take you after the intensive treatment, you've completed it and you're feeling better and outpatient is the level that you need. Then I would take you back, if that makes sense. And then I guess the third would be if I felt like the relationship wasn't appropriate, meaning that like maybe you had threatened me or shown up to my office when you weren't supposed to and said things that were inappropriate or made me scared in any way, then I wouldn't take you back either. But other than that, barring those like what I would call more, not extreme, but just those few scenarios, a therapist will always take you back. I always have like this open door policy. I've had patients who come and go for like, they'll see me for 6 months and they'll take a break and they come back a little bit. And that's how I've treated my own therapy. And that's how I expect my patients to treat their therapy. So that is what I want to address up front. However, for this specific question, it's not going to matter what therapist you're seeing. This issue is going to come up because what we're dealing with here sounds like more of an attachment issue. And so if you can find a therapist who specializes in attachment, I used to have one that worked across the hall from me in my office in Santa Monica. And it was beautiful because whenever I had a patient who showed what, maybe even just BPD tendencies that were a little too intensive or needed more care than I could offer. I was only in my office twice a week. She sees patients up to 3 times a week. So that ended up working out for a few of my patients in order to work on that attachment stuff. But if you can find someone who can do attachment therapy specifically, that would be a great fit. However, this therapist sounds fine to me. I don't know if she is aware that you were obsessed with her for this year. I think it's more that you know this, it sounds like. And I feel like because this is so intensive, because you're feeling so attached, so obsessed, there's nothing wrong with working on it with this specific person. I actually think it might be helpful because you clearly have already gone through this kind of overly attached piece. I would maybe, my hypothesis is that you have anxious attachment, meaning that because your mother, because you mentioned the relationship, she was never bonded to you, because you never felt like you could count on her to really see you, to really care for you, we go out into the world looking for someone else to fill that void, and we don't want them to leave. So we want to pull them really close, hence all this like obsessive thinking. And so working on this with a therapist is going to be, hopefully the therapist understands this, and it can be incredibly healing because we get to kind of essentially work out the shit that we have with our mom, the issues that we're struggling with her. We get to work it out with our therapist in a safe and contained environment. I also have an attachment workshop on my website, katiemorton.com. You can head over there. I have a ton of videos about attachment. I might encourage you to start looking into that more because that's what I think is happening here. And again, just to reiterate, no matter, that old saying that like, no matter where we go, there we are. That means that like, no matter what therapist you start seeing, the same type of behavior is going to come up. You're probably going to become obsessed and think about them all the time and pretend that you're communicating with them because it's that issue hasn't been resolved. So it's going to keep showing itself because the real problem is the complicated relationship you have with your mother. And until we heal that and until we understand our own attachment wounds and work towards a secure attachment, we're going to find this to continue to come up with any authority figures. Like you said, usually teachers, bosses, you find yourself really being obsessed with them. And that's going to happen until we do that work. So in summation, yes, your therapist would take you back. Unless they know this went on in some awkward way. I don't know. You didn't say that they even are aware. But yes, they'd take you back. Yes, we need to address this. We need to talk about it. I know it can feel embarrassing, but attachment wounds are incredibly common. Also, I'd check out some attachment videos that I have. I have the workshop. There's also a great therapist on Instagram. Her name is Julie Meneno. I've spoken with her many times. She's really great at what she does. And that's her specialty is attachment. And hers is primarily attachment in like romantic relationships, but she has a great Instagram called, I think it's called the Secure Therapist or the Secure Love Therapist. Anyway, I'm sure you can find her that way. Julie Meneno is her name. But that will really help you come out of this because we can't just switch therapists. It's not going to change the issue. It'll just continue to happen until we heal that wound and better understand it, right? I think there might even be some inner child work that needs to be done there. I have a workshop about that as well as free videos. But when you were younger, your mom wasn't really there for you. It sounds like didn't bond with you in the way that you needed. And so we have gone out into the world as we've grown up looking for someone else who would offer that to us. And we need to find a way to offer that to ourselves and heal so that we don't continue doing this over and over again. Okay? I hope that helps and makes sense. But let's move on to question number 2. This question says, "Hi, Kati. How can I move on without having a sense of self? I had depression for years, and I'm working on perfectionism and over-controlling, which are caused by my complex PTSD. Working on it in therapy. Gotcha. I'm now accepting myself more, and I want to make good choices for my future, but I can't make decisions because I've been out of touch with myself for so long. I have a sense of what I like and don't like in daily life, but I don't know what choices would align with the essence of who I am." I love this question. I think for a lot of us, we can feel like we just don't even know who we are. We've been out of touch for so long. But the fact that you say that you know what you like and don't like, but you don't know what choices will align with the essence, follow that like, don't like gut reaction. Because by doing that, we will learn. You'll have maybe a follow-up reaction. So let's say I know what I like in the daily. And I'm like, I know what kinds of food I like. I know what kind of activities I like to participate in. And somebody invites me to something that I'm like, I think I'd like to do that. So I say yes. And then I get there and I hate it. I just learned something about myself. I actually created another little piece of my sense of self that like, oh, I don't actually like it when I'm in a crowd, maybe. Or, you know what? I love outdoor activities. I don't enjoy outdoor activities with horses. I'm just making something up, right? We learn little bits about ourselves as we continue to make choices based on what we know thus far. Think of it like being a kid, right? When we're children, a lot of things we haven't done before. We can be scared to try something new. Oh, I've never been in the ocean. I've never rode a bike before. I've never played piano. We have all these things we haven't done, but a lot of times when we're children, we're kind of fearless and we try things out. Not all kids are fearless, but a lot of us are. And we can be also encouraged or challenged, and everybody's doing something for the first time, so it can feel very not just comfortable, but more like it's okay and accepted and almost expected to be a little bit nervous. So we do all these things. I want you to have that kind of childlike freedom to try something out. And once you've made that choice, you might have a different response, and that's okay too, because then we learn something. Because remember, our sense of self is not this fixed thing. We're not going to always like these same things or feel the same way we do now about something, right? But that's why I loved Inside Out too. It shows how our sense of self essentially forms. And it's these memories that we have, right? So as we make choices, good or bad, it doesn't matter. We're not only picking joyful memories, right? There's room for the anxiety ones, the sad ones, the disgust, the fear, embarrassment, all those. We make choices. We create memories out of those choices. And those memories grow into these beliefs about who we are, and those beliefs form our sense of self. And so it's this slow process. And each time we form a new memory, we have an opportunity to build our sense of self more, I guess, varied or more robust sense of self. And so my encouragement for you is to continue moving forward, to continue making choices based on the things that you do know, and take some risks about the things that you don't know. Now, these aren't risks that are going to put you in danger, because you said you have complex PTSD, and I don't want you feeling like you have to be hypervigilant, and I don't want you being re-traumatized, but we can still try things, learn. And when you feel a little bit nervous and you're like, but what if I don't like it? I want you to say to yourself, you know what? If I don't like it, I don't like it. I can always stop. The cool thing about being an adult, different like than being a child, is as an adult, if we've signed up to take this, I don't even know, to play intramural soccer, and we're like 2 practices in and we're like, you know what? This isn't for me. Guess what? We're an adult. We can be like, I paid my fee of $40 and I'm bouncing. I'm sorry. It's not for me. And we can say that to someone. I'm sorry, I was trying something new, but this isn't for me. Thank you so much for letting me try this out. And we leave. Amazing. When you're a kid, sometimes your parents force you to continue things, but you're an adult, so you don't have to. And we get to learn about those things. And again, we did that thing, this behavior. That behavior created this memory, and this memory is grown into a belief about like, I don't really like intramural soccer. Maybe as a kid I did, but as an adult, no, it's not for me. And we move on, right? And so, the belief about self might be something more like, you know what, team sports aren't really for me. But continue making those choices. We don't have to know what we like and don't like before we make choices. We kind of learn through them. And you'll have to assess at the time, like your risk tolerance, like, oh, this could be a little bit re-traumatizing. Maybe that's not the one we take a chance on. Maybe we take a chance on something that feels kind of benign and we're just a little unsure. We're always going to feel a little nervous because it's new, but we shouldn't feel scared or fearful for our safety or our life, but we can make those decisions and learn along the way, because our sense of self, I truly believe, is ever changing. No one really knows who they are all the time. We're always in these times of transition, still learning about ourselves, still making different choices and growing along the way. And I think that's what's really beautiful about being a human, is that we can grow and change. We don't have to be fixed. I honestly think when we try to make our sense of self a fixed thing, that's when we end up getting more wounded. That's when we struggle to connect with people and feel like we're part of things, because we can be, immovable. And that's not always an attractive trait in a person, right? We want to learn and grow and challenge ourselves and change. And I make a whole living on the belief and knowledge that people can change. And so know that you can too, as you make these choices. You're doing great. I'm really proud of you. Sounds like you're doing a lot of good work in therapy. Stick with it. Make those daily choices and see what we learn about it, okay? Moving on to question 3. This question says, hey, Katie, I had a question about certain eating disorder behavior. I'm wondering how often you have to purge for it to be considered an eating disorder. I'm sure you've answered this, but I thought I would ask specifically about purging. This is a great question. Now, when it comes to eating disorder behavior in general, purging itself, we can get sick, we can drink too much, we can get food poisoning, we can have all sorts of reasons that we would need to throw up. However, when it comes to an eating disorder, this purging behavior is done as a way to compensate. They call it compensatory behaviors. We can overexercise, we can abuse laxative, and we can purge as a way to make up for what we've eaten, or as a way to kind of numb out from what we're experiencing. Because some of my people who purge don't overeat. There's anorexia purging subtype, and that doesn't always mean that we binge. We could feel like we binged, which is all that matters. But for some people, there's not even a binge that has to happen. We just feel like we need to purge. And that can be because we are trying to essentially get out the icky feelings that we have. It can be we want to feel empty because we feel empty inside, kind of like part of our depression, maybe suicidal thoughts, right? It can come from a lot of different places. But what makes it eating disorder behavior is when we purge to compensate for something, to numb out, or to express emotion. Essentially, when we're using the purging behavior as a way to cope with something bigger. That is an eating disorder. And all it takes is one episode of purging to be considered an eating disorder. Now, we can talk about different types of eating disorders, right? Whether it's bulimia nervosa, whether it's a binge eating disorder, there's no compensatory behavior there, whether it's EDNOS or what used to be called EDNOS, now it's OSFED, otherwise specified eating or feeding disorder. It just once, because OSFED exists to capture all of the eating disorder behaviors we do that maybe don't quite meet the diagnostic criteria for another one. Meaning that, like, I am restricting my food intake, but I haven't met quite the requirements for anorexia. But then I purge, but I don't purge, like 2 to 3 times a week. I don't quite meet the criteria for bulimia. I fall into OSFED. Therefore, how often? Just once. It has to have that intent, though. It has to be a coping skill. Otherwise, it might just be because we're sick or something. But when we make ourselves throw up for one of those purposes, for one of those reasons, that's eating disorder behavior. Okay? Let's move on to question number 4. This question says, hey, Katie, how do I work up the courage to talk to my therapist about something I have never talked about before, ever? The thing itself is more of a little T trauma, but it has a weird hold over me. It makes me so anxious and has made me avoid things for a decade. I think because I've never talked about it and I've been avoiding it, it's made it worse. So I wonder if finally talking about it will help. It will, but we can talk about this. My therapist is great, and I've been meeting with her for 5 years, but I get nervous about being vulnerable, especially since I think I'm having a disproportionate reaction. What should I do? Okay, a couple things. Now, we all do this. We all hide things from our therapist. I personally also do this, and it can take me a session or two to come back around, even myself, being a therapist, knowing that I should talk about this. It can take me a couple sessions to come back and be like, you know what? I omitted XYZ. I'm sorry, but this is why. Now, I actually don't owe her an apology. I'm just a people pleaser, and I struggle with that too. It's very normal. And we omit or we like even lie because we're trying to protect ourselves. And the thing that I would encourage you to consider, and I think I have a couple answers already here, but is why we're nervous to talk about it. What are we afraid is going to happen? And in cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, we talk about this like downward arrow questioning. So it's like, if I told her, then what? What do we think, right? Okay, let's say we're afraid she's going to think that we're a loser. Okay, so she thinks we're a loser, then what, right? I want you to continue working down until you kind of figure out as far down as you can go. And I'm answering that quickly, and that's probably not the answer that you would give, but if this, then what? If that, then what? And keep going down until you feel like, oh, it's because I'm afraid I'm not worthy. Or it's because I'm afraid that she's going to judge me and think this about me. Or it's because I actually think this about me, right? Just be kind of curious, not judgmental, and figure out what we're really believing. Like, for example, I omitted something in therapy. This is months and months ago. And it took me, I don't know if it was I think it was the next session, but maybe let's say 2 sessions. And I told her, hey, I didn't mention this because I didn't want you to think that this was still a problem. And I think it's because I'm not ready to even talk about it yet. And she was like, well, how come you don't think you're ready to talk about it yet? And I was like, because I feel like it makes me vulnerable. And I feel like I have enough going on. I don't really want to deal with that right now, right? We have to figure out, and that's not even the full answer. I probably could, now that I've talked with her about it and like processed it, I probably could do more downward arrow questioning within myself and figure out that it's probably because I feel like I have to keep myself together for everybody else. It's that lack of boundaries thing, again, coming up in another way. Surprise, surprise. But I say all that just to tell you that, like, I don't care if it's a little T trauma. I don't care if it's a behavior that you don't like that you do. There's no reason for judgment here about what it is. Like you talked about a disproportionate reaction. I already feel there's a ton of judgment that you're giving yourself about this experience instead of offering what you really need, which is a little compassion and understanding. Hey, this is a big deal for me. That's all that matters. I'm not comparing your big deal to someone else's big deal. It doesn't matter. It's a big deal to you. And you've been seeing your therapist for 5 years and you still haven't been able to talk about it. And there's something in that. And so we need to kind of do that work ahead of time. I want you to do some of that downward arrow questioning. What, if I share this, then what? If my therapist thinks or feels this way, then what? What am I afraid? Like, what are you really afraid of? Or what are you concerned about? Or what's the root belief that this comes from? Give yourself an opportunity to kind of understand that, because personally, I feel that that's the most helpful, because I could give you all sorts of tips and tools about like write it down and practice saying it, which helps. But if we don't really understand it, we haven't talked about it in 5 years, it's going to be really hard for us, even with the prep work, to go in and all of a sudden say it, because there's a reason that we're not. There's going to be those other defense mechanisms that pop up again. And I want to make sure we're kind of planning for that. So do some of that personal, internal detective work to figure out what's going on. And then we can consider how to bring it up. Because I found that once I did that downward arrow at least 4 or 5 times, I feel like it's usually a good rough number of like, if this, then what? If I've done that, then at least gives me a little bit of insight where I can say, hey, I didn't mention this the other day, or I haven't mentioned this in our sessions because, and then we have that answer, because I'm worried that I'm overreacting. And then your therapist might say, well, what haven't you meant? What are you afraid you're overreacting about? And you could even say at that point, like, I don't know if I'm ready to talk about it, but there's something that happened and I feel like I'm overreacting about it, right? It gives us a way in. We don't have to dump it all at once. That's where the therapist's job comes in, where we are challenged to ask good questions to get you around to a place where you feel safe disclosing. But that gives you hopefully a place to start. Okay? Do that downward arrow questioning. It helps me every time, especially helps me understand myself and like why I'm reacting the way that I am. Okay. Keep me posted. Let's move on to question number 5. This question says, hello, Kati. I hope you're doing well. Hello, I am. It says, my question, what do we do if we've been abusive? I feel that I was abusive in a relationship, though my ex and every mental health professional I've met has said that I wasn't. That's interesting. The professionals have said it's just OCD. In any event, people have been trying to convince me I wasn't abusive for 11 years. Ever since that relationship, I isolated myself from most people for a decade, thinking people were better off not knowing me. It hasn't worked. I need a new strategy. What I'm trying to do is convince myself that even if I was abusive, it doesn't mean I have to be forever. That I'm somehow still worthy of love and the opportunity to date again. So I need to know, supposing I was abusive, what do I do? Besides the question may be helpful to others. Yes, of course it will. It's interesting that you feel like you isolating yourself was abusive is what it sounds like, I guess. Isolating ourselves is not, I mean, I guess you could say it's abusive through neglect, but as long as we were kind of communicative and we like broke up or, you know, I don't see anything really abusive about that. But it sounds like, at the very least, this belief that it's abusive is something, it's a firmly held belief. And it honestly probably doesn't matter to you what I say because you're always going to believe that it was abusive. So let's just, sometimes in therapy, a random thing I don't think I've talked about ever before is like, if I have a patient who believes something about them, I can say that that's not true till I'm blue in the face, but that's never going to convince them. So when I have a patient who believes, like in this case, this person believes that they were abusive, it sounds like other people in their lives have tried to tell them they're not, but it doesn't work. It's a firmly held belief. It could be a firmly held false belief, which we would call a delusion, which a lot of us have, not just schizophrenic patients. We can have these firmly held false beliefs. And no matter how much evidence I bring to the contrary, I cannot be convinced. You know, my patient's not going to be convinced that it's different. Okay. And so as a therapist, a lot of times in these scenarios, I will not argue back. I will say something like, I disagree, but we can move forward with the assumption that you were, right? So in this case, I'd say, I disagree that you were abusive, because I do. However, let's suppose that you were. I can play that game with you. We can go down that rabbit hole. And the reason I do this in therapy is because if we, as a therapist, are combative up front and like fighting against one belief system, we can never move forward. Like I said, I can say it till I'm blue in the face and it will never get us anywhere. And so I won't argue against it because it's not going to get us anywhere. And instead, I will try to disprove it through conversation and other questions along the way. More like in the long run, not today, not trying to, change this belief right now. Does that make sense? I hope so. So in this case, let's suppose that you were abusive. Okay, I'll play this game. What do you do? Now, if we believe that we were the abusive one in our relationship, which a lot of us have felt that way, right? If we grew up in abusive homes, we might not know another way to act. I'm not condoning abusive behavior. I'm just saying that that's where it can come out of. That's the way we learned people navigate arguments, right? For example, if we're abusive, there's really probably three main things, maybe more, maybe less, but let's start off with three here. The first is figuring out where that urge to be abusive came from. What I mean by that is, like, if I'm abusive or nasty or negative to someone in my life, that means something else is going on with me. And it's up to me to figure out what that other thing is. Like an example could be that I've been feeling really overwhelmed myself or burnt out, not taking care of myself, or I don't feel like they understand me because I'm not communicating clearly, right? We can do some research on the internal personal research to figure out why we've been so nasty. Okay. Then the next step is apologizing. And this is a big one. And I think for a lot of us who've been abused or been in just harmful, nasty relationships, an apology goes a really fucking long way, right? The amount of those of us, and I'm going to get into narcissism next, which is perfect, but like the amount of people in our community and in our world who all they want is an apology from an abusive or narcissistic parent, and they'll never get it. Like, apologies goes a long way. So if we think we're abusive, we can do the apology tour. We can go around all the people that we feel like we have wronged. And instead of doing a non-apology, which is like, I'm so sorry you feel that way, it's not an apology. We can say something that's real. We can say, I'm so sorry that I neglected you. I left without any communication. I'm so sorry if that was painful for you. That was not my intention. I want you to know that I'm sorry if I hurt you, or I'm sorry I hurt you if you already know that you did. We apologize directly for the behavior and the pain that it caused. So that's a great thing to do. And then the third is to consider what types of behaviors we do want to see in relationships. Because if the assumption being that our abusive behaviors come out of learnings from our past, whether that's like the way our parents' dynamic was, or maybe we had an abusive relationship, we don't know any other way, like wherever that's coming from, what would a healthy relationship look like? We probably want to talk with a therapist about this and try to consider what that would look and feel like, because the weird thing about changing behavior, especially within relationships, is that when we do something different, it feels uncomfortable. So like if we're in a relationship that maybe we're used to, like we shout to have arguments, and let's say we encounter someone who doesn't do that and they're like, oh, you're upset. I can see you're upset. You're raising your voice. I'm going to take a break and we'll talk about this in a minute. And they don't allow for that. That can be incredibly uncomfortable. What do we do with that? How do we navigate it? That doesn't feel right. They're supposed to fight with me. I remember my mom telling me that her family, like they fought, and my dad's family did not. When my mom and dad first got together, my mom would want to fight, and my dad would just say, I'm so sorry. He would apologize immediately, right? Like lay down, take it. Like, oh, I don't want to fight with you. And he'd be like, I love you. I don't want to fight with you. My mom would be like, fight with me. She wanted to fight for that. Like it was just what she was used to. And she told me that it took them a little while to figure out how to actually have like a healthy discussion versus fight or not fight, like something in the middle. And I would argue, even as growing up, like I never saw any of that happen, which made it hard for me to even know how to navigate disagreements. Like I'm still conflict averse, and that sucks. It makes it harder for me, right? So anyway, all that to say that we're going to have to figure out, what does a healthy relationship look like and how does it feel for us so that we can cultivate that going forward. Okay. So just to recap, number one, we want to figure out like why we were abusive, like where this come from, what is it that we're really experiencing, why are we reacting in that way? Number two, we do our apology tour. We say sorry to everybody. If we were the abusive one in the relationship, it's really important that we apologize for the action and the pain caused. We're not saying, I'm sorry you feel that way. We're not saying, oh, if I hurt your feelings, I'm so sorry. We're acknowledging, hey, I was harmful and hurtful, and I want to apologize for that. And then third, we have to figure out what a healthy relationship looks like so that we don't go out and recreate the same thing all over again. And so I really think that that's what you do. Do I think you were being abusive? No. But supposing that you were, those are the steps that I would take. Okay. Final question. Question number 6 says, hey, Katie, I hope you're doing well. I am doing well. Hope you're doing well. It says, I want to know that my mom is a narcissist. But when I was growing up, my mom would wake up at night and yell and run away. And I remember my dad always going after her and bringing her back. And I don't know why she did it, but it scared the hell out of me. And I didn't understand it because I was only a kid. But can that be why I am a light sleeper? 100%. And make my anxiety worse? I know this is not the only case that I know it is not the only case. I have been through a lot. I never did sleep deep because I was always too scared. I felt that I always had to protect myself in some way. Can it be why my anxiety is so highly present? I love your podcast. Oh, thank you. Of course. Okay, so lots of questions here. Can this be why you're a light sleeper? Yes. If we grew up in a family where a lot of trauma, a lot of fighting, maybe drug or alcohol consumption occurred at night, we could never have felt like it was safe or okay to fully go sleep, to, like you said, to get deep sleep. I have a lot of patients and even friends of mine who to this day will say that they feel like they have panic attacks during their sleep, or even as an adult, they don't even live at the home that they grew up in with their parents, and they'll still wake up out of these like nightmares, right? And so the way that we were raised and the fact that you never felt safe and secure, I don't know if I know we mentioned this, but I've never said it directly, like the importance of growing up with a safe and secure environment that is, for the most part, predictable and consistent. And there's communication, and we feel like things are okay, and we're not left questioning and wondering and feeling like we're so unsure of our safety, the safety of other members of our family, financial security, food security. Like if we don't have all that swirling at a young age, we can sleep deep. But when we have that all swirling, it's really hard for us to rest, essentially because we're hypervigilant, right? If we have PTSD, you have to think of post-traumatic stress disorder, because if your mom was yelling and running away and your dad was chasing her, it's very chaotic. That can be very scary. You don't understand fully what's going on. That can be traumatizing. And when we're traumatized and it is too much for us to process at the moment, which when we're children, we really don't have a ton of resources, right? that trauma can turn into PTSD. And one of the largest pieces of PTSD, one of the main symptoms, is hypervigilance, which means that we are always on edge, essentially always in our stress response, looking for things in our environment that could cause harm, and we're very jumpy about things maybe happening. And so at night, because that's when usually the trauma would occur, even as you grow up, you're still going to feel like the trauma will occur. So I believe, yes, that could be why you are a light sleeper, and also why your anxiety is so bad, because you're in your stress response constantly. And that would explain why you never got to have deep sleep. Now, when it comes to your mom being a narcissist, it sounds, for anybody who's wondering, a lot of people nowadays want to say that someone in their life is a narcissist. And yes, the symptoms, I feel like a lot of people will have one or two of those symptoms, but not everybody is a narcissist. However, some of the things to look out for, or easy ways to know if someone in your life does show some of these indicators, is if, number one, they always make things about them. Now, that can be really obvious when you think like, oh, somebody's really full of themselves. Narcissists can present that way, but that's only one piece of it. Like the more covert types won't just make something about themselves or change the subject to them all the time. The covert types will instead, like, let's say you're having a big birthday party, they'll show up really late, or they'll cause a scene while they're there, or they'll come in crying, saying that, you know, they got broken up with, or, oh, something horrific happened. They can lie and make up a scenario, or they can actually create a scenario and make it about them during that event. Weddings, birthdays, all of those are times and places when covert narcissists like to make it about themselves. And so if that is happening in your life, that's, you know, it's an indicator that they could be a narcissist. Another is they can't apologize. And they'll do the non-apology a lot. Like, well, I'm sorry that you felt that way. That's not an apology. You're apologizing for my feelings? What? Right? In your life, if you think back, they probably never said sorry. And I think a huge indicator is that they will go through these phases of, I mean, it's technically like love bombing. And then I think, do they call it degradation? But it's essentially like they could be really, really sweet and like, oh my God, you're the best thing ever. I love you so much, blah, 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 blah. And then like, I can't believe you'd be so disrespectful. Like you're such a bitch or an asshole or whatever. And so they swing between these. And so you see this pattern of like ups and downs, and the nasty stuff will come when you place boundaries. And they'll make you feel like such a selfish jerk for placing any kind of boundary, because that feels like a wound to them, because they believe that they should be able to do whatever they want, whenever they want. So anyway, if anybody out there is wondering, and I have tons of videos about narcissism. I have one specifically about mothers with narcissism. I have one it's on TikTok in short form, but also long form over on YouTube. So you can check that out if you are wanting to know more. Also, a colleague of mine wrote an amazing book about narcissism. That's her specialty. Dr. Ramani, if you don't know her, she's on YouTube as well. Her book is called It's Not You, and it's all about narcissism, and that could be really helpful and healing too. Okay? Thank you all so much for listening and watching. Thank you for sharing this podcast. It really does help. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Do your homework, and I'll see you next time.